First Things, episode number 68.
I seem to be lost.
And so you're working around the clock so you don't take time for yourself to feel like an actual human being.
I used to feel like no matter how hard I worked, I was just spinning my wheels.
Trying to be perfect, we try to have everything in place at one point in time, and you can't.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to this episode of First Things, the podcast dedicated to practical productivity based on modern research. My name is Brandon Vaughn, and it's my goal to help you apply productive solutions to your life to help you live with less stress, greater passion, and amazing results. So good to be back with you today. I had not planned to be out last week. So if you are listening to me in real time, last week was Thanksgiving in the U.S., and I was actually planning on doing an episode. So apologies if you wondered where I went, because I never mentioned it in the episode prior to that. Well, let me tell you what happened to me and how all of this relates to essentialism. So I was going on a trip with my family to Universal Studios in Orlando, a place that we love to go at least once, maybe twice a year. Was going to be back before Thanksgiving. We were going early. And during that trip, about the second day, we were going to be there for 3 days. About the second day on that trip, I started feeling terrible. And I honestly don't know what it was. If it was a bad cold, if it was a flu, what it was. But I started running a fever, started feeling incredibly tired, and ended up being sick for about half of that trip, which really sucked. But that carried over throughout Thanksgiving. So when I got back from that trip, I was just wiped out because I refused to stay in the room. So I would actually keep going out and spending time with my family, even though I didn't really feel that great at the time. In fact, at one point, probably the most embarrassing moment of all of this, I remember that we rented a wheelchair for my sister who had some knee problems, and we were doing this, I think, on the last day of the trip. So we got this to help her, and we stopped at one of the Harry Potter rides there, and I started feeling terrible again, feverish, weak, tired. So I ended up getting in that wheelchair and taking like a 45-minute nap outside the Harry Potter world while all of my family did some other things, which was quite embarrassing for me. I'm sitting out there just basically passed out in front of the Harry Potter castle at Universal Studios. But anyway, I came back and I was going to do my podcast episode right around Thanksgiving time and was just totally wiped out for the rest of the week and to that Saturday, and had another trip that I had to take, this time a business trip, and decided I just can't do it. I just have to take a break from everything because it was taking everything I could do just to make this business trip. And now I'm back from the business trip and getting back into the podcast recording again. But apologies for that. I'm feeling a lot better. Still has some stuff kind of lingering around, but otherwise doing better. Glad to be back here with you guys. But guess what? If we were going to go over my essential report card for the last weeks, it sucks bad. It really does. I mean, F all across the board for everything that I'd been putting into place. I had spent 5 to 6 weeks consecutively writing every single day. Sometimes better on some days than others, but still every single day writing, and had written several chapters in a book. And wow, this last week when I took the vacation, I decided to take a few days off, and then I got sick. I didn't feel like writing then. Didn't write on this business trip. And today, after I record this podcast, will be the first day that I will actually have gotten back into writing again. Now, I wanted to tell you this, one, to explain why there wasn't a podcast episode last week, but also to talk a little bit about failure before we talk about our next chapter in Greg McKeown's Essentialism book. Because I suffered some massive failure from my goals and my visions and my resonators in my life for nearly 2 weeks now. And this can be enough, especially those who deal with perfectionism, that it could totally derail me. I could spiral off into some self-condemnation and wallow around in self-pity and never get back on track. And it does remind me back in the days that I was doing my dissertation when I was in my doctoral program, and I had episodes like this where sometimes I would get off the bandwagon. And I learned then, again, one of those lessons I thought would carry all throughout my life, and I find it interesting how I keep forgetting this lesson, how I quickly learned in that episode to not beat up on myself, to not condemn myself, to get back up and just start. So what if I've just now wasted 2 weeks and I haven't done anything? So what? get back and get moving again, pick back up where you left off, and start moving. Now, see, this is something that I hadn't always done in the past, because if I had let something derail me, or I had derailed myself, which I'm not so sure that I didn't cause some of this sickness, because I had spent the previous week getting very little sleep, and I don't think my immune system was very high at the time, but I could be down on myself, and I have done that in the past, where I've been so down on myself, and I would not get back in and start moving again. Sometimes I would even just claim defeat in that moment and just say it's a lost cause, I might as well not even do it anymore. And then I can get trapped in the if only statements. If only I had slept more. If only I had done this. If only I had written just maybe 5 minutes during all of that time. None of this would have happened. I would have been more on track. If only they had done something, I can get around to where I blame other people as well. But the key, and this all relates to essentialism, because you're not going to bat 100% on this in your life. You're never going to get it all right. You're going to have some massive failures sometimes, and that is okay. The goal isn't 100% perfection. The goal is that you keep moving toward a particular direction. The goal in all of this is not a destination, it is a journey. So there will come things in your life that will derail you from that journey, but as long as you get back on the journey, I don't care if it's 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 day, 1 month, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, I don't care how long it's been. If you feel derailed from that journey, get back on it. It's never too late. It's only too late if you say it's too late. You must look in a mirror and acknowledge that you cannot move on until you've learned from this experience. Quit thinking of life as a destination. Essentialism is not a destination. It's not that one day you will arrive. We said this many weeks ago. There is this entropy effect of life. I wish it was different. I wish it didn't happen this way. But the fact is, if you don't diligently pursue essentialism in your life, you will find that 1 week of neglect, of not thinking about this, you will act like you've never known anything about essentialism. We said this many weeks ago. You could have a PhD in essentialism and easily neglect it and act like you don't know anything about essentialism. That's the way this works in life. So expect that you will occasionally fail. There's nothing wrong with that. Learning from this experience is going to be perhaps difficult, perhaps humbling in some way, but you will be so incredibly thankful for this period in your life. You will learn some very critical, life-changing lessons from the fact that you did fail. I learned this in the past few weeks. I've learned again to get back on it, to not sit in self-condemnation, but to learn from this period of time and to realize that I had a tremendous amount of momentum going, and all I have to do is just get back in there. And I want to tell you this to encourage you, because I am convinced that I would not be where I am today if it had not been for failure. Now, I could look back in my life and think so many things. I wish I could go back in time and talk to myself and prep myself and guard myself against some of these failures I've had in my life. But I know, I'm convinced, I would not be here where I am today. I would not be doing this podcast here today if it hadn't been for failures in my life. But not every failure ends very good. It doesn't end well many, many times. Some people suffer setbacks and they never recover. But I don't think it has to be this way. It's all how you process it. I'm convinced that if you're going to succeed, you must learn to deal powerfully with failure. And let me give you 6 quick components, if you will, pillars of turning failure to your advantage. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about Greg McKeown's book today. First of all, you've got to acknowledge the failure. This is where it all begins. Failure is just natural if you're striving to deliver big results. Failure is going to happen if you're going to pursue essentialism in your life. The problem comes when we fail and we refuse to acknowledge it. Once you acknowledge the failure, you've taken away all of its power. You can then turn it into something positive. So in this whole thing with me, I realized that I failed from my major objectives. Now, I was sick, and there was a lot of other things going on. But I acknowledge the fact, you know what? The last 2 weeks have been a total bust. I've just completely gotten off track of what I wanted to do and what was important to me. And that's okay. I've acknowledged it. I'm off track, and now it's time to get back on track. Second thing, we need to take full responsibility. You're not going to get anywhere as long as you blame others for your failure. For example, I could blame other people for the fact that I wasn't sleeping very much in the past weeks because I had a lot of stuff to do that some people had put on me. And if it wasn't for them, then I would have gotten more sleep and maybe my immune system would have been more up to par. And then I could have, and I could just go on and on like that. But you're never going to get anywhere as long as you blame other people for your own mistakes. As long as the responsibility is external or outside of you, you end up being a victim in life because you can't control other people. You can only control yourself. But when you take responsibility for your own failure and become fully accountable for it, you take back control. Suddenly you realize that you could have done things differently. You open up the door to possibility, to creating a different outcome in the future. But this can only happen when you acknowledge the failure and you own it. Now, a third thing you should always do is mourn the failure. I'm not simply telling you to have a positive attitude. Failure hurts. Failure stings. It hurts, sometimes deeply, when we don't live up to our potential, when we get derailed from our essentialism. Many times there are very real and serious losses that occur. Other people could be hurt. Sometimes innocent people can be hurt. And it's quite okay to feel sad about those things. Sometimes it takes a while to recover from those things. I see a lot of things, especially in New Age type of teachings, that just say, hey, have a positive attitude. And there's truth to those things. I don't discount what they're saying, but sometimes I think it makes us feel ashamed for the fact that we mourn loss and we mourn failure. And there's some therapy there to say, wow, the last 2 weeks, I've just totally blown. I could have been nearly finished with the book maybe by now if I hadn't gotten derailed from that. And yes, there's a sense where I have to be a little bit sad about that. And there's nothing wrong with that. The positivity comes from the fact that I refuse to stay there. I refuse to just bury myself a hole and sit there and weep forever. No, I'm going to have a good cry internally from the fact of failure, but now it's time to move on and to learn from the experience. Even failure can be redemptive if you learn something from it. It doesn't have to be career ending. It doesn't have to be a life-changing moment, but it could. But honestly, there are just some things in this life that you cannot learn or won't learn without failing. I, again, wish it was different than that. But pain can be a powerful teacher. You've all heard the old saying, that which does not kill us makes us stronger. But it only makes us stronger if we thoroughly process that experience and determine what we could have done differently and what we will do differently next time around. A real interesting way that you could put that into practice is instead of asking what went wrong, ask what was missing. Because if you say what went wrong, it shuts down possibility. It often results in blaming. But if you say what was missing, it opens up possibility. It results in learning. It says, what can we do differently next time? And then the last thing is to change your behavior. Another old philosopher once said that those who cannot learn from history are destined to repeat it. And we really haven't learned anything until it affects our behavior. If we keep doing the same things that led to the failure, we're destined to get more failure. We've got to be willing to change. And it really does start with us. This is the one thing we have control over. So yes, I look back and I think 2 weeks just down the toilet in terms of doing music, in terms of writing, in terms of trying to be healthier in my life and doing things like that, just down the toilet. But now I'm going to learn from this. And in my case, I was sick for most of it, so I probably couldn't have done anything anyway. But what I am learning is that I can bounce back from this. And it's time to get moving again. It's time to put those essentialisms in front again and start pursuing those. And start taking these small increments of time, like 30 minutes in the morning, where I will start writing again and get back into that habit. It was just a small amount of time. 30 minutes seemed so insignificant, but I was able to write chapters doing that very thing. Spending 30 minutes a night working on my music, get back into that habit again. Learn from this and move forward with this. Learn that sleep is maybe a lot more important than I was even placing it. As much as I believe it is important now in my life, but I still didn't put it into practice and spent 4 or 5 days where I was getting maybe more like 5 to 6 hours of sleep, and my body just couldn't handle any type of sickness. So I'm going to learn from that, and I'm going to put back into play sleep practices that I was doing before. And so I'm getting back into it, and this is a huge thing to deal with failure. You can't allow failure to hold you back from your next adventure. If you fall off the horse, if you fall off the bicycle, you have to get back on, and you need to do it immediately. If you don't do this, the failure only magnifies itself in your mind. If you wait long enough, you might never get on at all. Instead, you have to put the past behind you and start moving forward in your life. So, wow, I didn't want to talk way long about this, but hopefully that helps a little bit. It's a little bit of an explanation of where I was last week, but also talking about how I'm processing failure in the midst of this. By the way, for those creative types that are looking for some really cool training, I just found out about this today, although I signed up for it many weeks ago. Jackie wrote me today and reminded me about this. There's a new course on Creative Live, which is at creativelive.com, called Fulfill Your Creative Purpose by Anne Ray. And I've gotten some other courses from Anne before in the past. This one is very similar to Vanessa Van Edwards' 30-day course. The whole thing is to develop a artistic enterprise. So any of you who are into fulfilling creative purposes, you might want to check this out. It's free for the next 30 days. Very, really cool course that deals with a lot of psychology behind being a creative. And I think it would apply to a lot of us. Definitely would recommend that you go and check that out. I'm going to be checking it out as well, probably buying that course as well as soon as I watch a little bit of that. So let's get into our book for today. Remember that we are in the last chapters of the book. We are dealing with putting this into practice, the whole part of the essentialism into practice. Last week, well, the week before that, technically, we talked about buffering in our lives, creating buffer, creating margin in our lives. Today, we're talking about subtracting, bringing forth more by removing the obstacles. Lao-tzu once said, very famous quote, "To attain knowledge, add things every day, but to attain wisdom, subtract things every day." And that's such great advice to put into our lives, that we can bring forth more by removing things in our lives, by removing obstacles in our lives. I think age has shown me that there is a lot of benefit by subtracting things in my life. I used to think that it was all about adding things, and that's a very good thing to gain knowledge, is what we just quoted here. To attain knowledge, add things every day. Read things, study things, listen to podcasts, do all these types of things to attain knowledge. But to attain wisdom comes from subtracting things, doing less, and focusing on those vital few things to do in life instead of the trivial many things. So when we go about applying essentialism in our lives, we must really think through what are the obstacles that can be in my life that are keeping me back from achieving what really matters the most to me. What are those constraints in my life? Can I identify what they are? And then can I go about removing those or reducing them to a very insignificant amount so that it doesn't cause a lot of friction in my life to keep me really executing my essential things? Here's what Greg says about this. A non-essentialist approaches execution in a reactive, haphazard manner. Because the non-essentialist is always reacting to crises rather than anticipating them, he is forced to apply quick fix solutions, the equivalent to plugging his finger into the hole of a leaking dam and hoping the whole thing doesn't burst. Being good with a hammer, the non-essentialist thinks everything is a nail. Thus, he applies more and more pressure, but this ends up only adding more friction and frustration. Indeed, in some situations, the harder you push on someone, the harder he or she will push back. Essentialists don't default to Band-Aid solutions. Instead of looking for the most obvious or immediate obstacles, they look for the ones slowing down progress. They ask what is getting in the way of achieving what is essential. While the non-essentialist is busy applying more and more pressure and piling on more and more solutions, the essentialist simply makes a one-time investment in removing obstacles. This approach goes beyond just solving problems. It is a method of reducing your efforts to maximize your results. So, in summary, a non-essentialist is going to pile on quick fix solutions, but the essentialist is removing obstacles to progress. A non-essentialist does more, but an essentialist is going to bring forth more by focusing on the less. So how do you go about producing more by removing more? And it's basically a paradigm shift, if you will, because instead of focusing our efforts on adding things to our lives, adding new resources to our lives, the essentialist is focusing on constraints and obstacles that we need to remove. It does definitely go back to the fact of having a sort of mission statement in our lives, because we're always going back to what our essential things are, what our mission in life is, what the vital few things are in our lives, and doing an in-depth analysis, if you will, of what is preventing those things. Is it a matter of skill? Is it a matter of knowledge? Is it a matter of resources? Is it a matter of time? So, for instance, in me writing the book, if I am going to do this and it is an essential thing and I find that I'm not writing, well, why am I not writing? Well, it's because I haven't devoted time to it, or maybe I didn't have time to do it. Well, what can I do to remove that obstacle? What can I do to enable more time in my life to go after those essential things? Notice it again is a more subtractive focus of life rather than an addition focus. I'm not asking what new app I can buy, what new things I can do. I'm asking for where I can carve away to allow some breathing room for that type of thing. So the first thing that Greg mentions to put this into practice is we need to be very clear about the essential intent. We can't know what obstacles we're going to get rid of in our lives until we're very clear on the desired outcome. So it goes back to previous weeks, again, of having that mission statement, of having a clear focus, of having very detailed understanding of what your goal and aspirations are. To, again, not say I'm going to be a good person, but know specifically what are you going to do. To not just say I'm going to write a book, but to say I'm going to write a chapter in the next week. We're going to be very specific about what we're trying to obtain so that we can clearly identify the obstacles that would keep that. The more direct you are here, the more specific you are here in terms of what the goal is, the easier it will be to identify what is keeping you back from that. So if I'm going to say I'm going to write a book, well, that's so vague, I don't really know what the obstacles are that's keeping me from that. But if I say specifically that I'm going to write 2,000 words this week, or I'm going to write a complete chapter this week, and then I can see what needs to be done on each single day, then I can start maybe seeing what some of the obstacles are that I need to remove in order to fulfill that. So we're, first of all, very clear about our essential intent. The second thing that Greg suggests is to identify the slowest thing, which he calls the slowest hiker, because in the chapter, I didn't read this for you earlier, but he gives a story about a guy dealing with some young boys, taking them on a hiking adventure. And there was one boy in particular that was the slowest one, constantly slowing down the entire group. And it's all about how he tried to fix that and try to figure out how to get everyone together because of that one slowest hiker. So here's what Greg says. He says, ask yourself, what are all the obstacles standing between me and getting this done? What are they? What are all the obstacles? And ask yourself, what is keeping me from completing this? Make a list of these obstacles. They might include not having the information you need, not having the correct energy level. Also, it could basically be your desire for perfection, which is something I always have to deal with myself, that this could be a major obstacle for me. And Greg goes on, prioritize the list using the question, what is the obstacle that, if removed, would make the majority of other obstacles disappear? So what is that one thing? What is your slowest hiker, if you will? That one thing that you must keep in mind in order to be productive. Now, these could even be things that are productive themselves, or at least give the image of being productive, like doing research, like emailing people for information, like writing or rewriting something in order to get it more perfect the next time. But those themselves can be obstacles. And then the third thing that Greg mentions is to remove that obstacle, which could be a matter of mental state, to replace a thought, replace an idea in your head. Instead of saying this has to be perfect or else, which could be an obstacle. Perfectionism definitely can be an obstacle to getting things done. To replace that thought with maybe it's done, and done is better than being perfect. I would rather have something done than it to be perfect. And I apply this all the time to me writing books and writing music. Yes, I could try to sit there and write one song that is like a Let It Be or Hey Jude from the Beatles type of thing, or I could write 100 songs and do that in my life instead. And which one would I rather do? And the fact is, it's always this perfectionism that misguides us into thinking these things. If you've ever read anything about Paul McCartney or John Lennon, you realize that they wrote a lot of songs that were not very good and what people don't really like and know of them today. And I think it generally takes about 100 ideas to finally come up with one that really resonates with people. But that's an obstacle. Our thinking can definitely be an obstacle that we must learn to replace with different thoughts that get us moving. So if being perfect on something is keeping you from moving, then you need to replace that with something that does get you moving. So what can you think instead that actually gets you actually doing something and moving toward your essential things? And as always, as we do this, we need to learn to start small. We can't go from zero to hero overnight if we're not used to doing this stuff. It's small baby steps, little bit at a time, moving us toward this. As Greg says, it's kind of like dislodging a boulder at the top of a hill. All it takes is a small shove, and then the momentum will naturally build. But start small. Start with something that is doable, and start putting this into your life. Well, we'll stop here for today. I hope that helps some. I know we spent a good amount of time talking about failure at the beginning of this, but that's something that I'm going through. And to be true to hosting this podcast, I want to tell you about that. I want to tell you about my own struggles because I know other people face this as well. And when you're dealing with essentialism and dealing with failures is going to be part of it. And I experienced that in droves this last week or the last 2 weeks. And this is what I'm doing to get back on track. And I'm starting today doing that. Yes, I had a good internal cry about how I blew the last 2 weeks and how I wish I wasn't sick and all this kind of stuff. Fact is, that's where it was. Now it's time to move on, and that starts today. So, will you start today if you've been off track? Don't wait until tomorrow. Start right now. Next week, we will talk about Chapter 17, which is Progress, the Power of Small Wins. If anything has resonated with you today, you'd like to reach out and let me know, talk to me, feel free to email me at me@brandonvaughn.com, Vaughn, V as in Victor. And you can get me straight away through there. You can also reach me through Twitter, Facebook. I'm not always as discerning when people write me in those ways, so sometimes it kind of slips through the cracks a little bit. But if you email me, I definitely will get it. Would love to hear from you. Love to hear about how you're applying this stuff and dealing with that. I think we will more or less kind of finish around the first of the year as well with this. Have a great interview with Greg McEwen that he did with another friend of mine that I'm going to put up on here as a summary of what we're talking about probably in a few weeks. And then we'll go into our next topic, which will probably be a book about how we learn, which I think many of you will find very interesting as we get into that. So until next time, remember this. It's time to get back to essentialism. And especially if you're like me and for some reason holiday periods have gotten you off track, it's time to just get back going again. And it's time to look at what obstacles have been in your way, primarily obstacles in our thinking, and start replacing those with thoughts that get us moving. So think about this week, see how you can put this into practice, and let me know how you are doing. As always, embrace today with passion and intention, and don't die with your music still inside you.